After the Russian revolutions of 1917, many of these obstacles to a negotiated peace became weaker. The Vatican, working through Cardinal Pacelli, later Pope Pius XII, sought a negotiated peace which would prevent the destruction of the Habsburg Empire, the last Catholic great power in Europe. Prominent men in all countries, like Lord Lansdowne, British Foreign Secretary before 1914, became so alarmed at the spread of socialism that they were willing to make almost any concessions to stop the destruction of civilized ways of life by continued warfare. Humanitarians like Henry Ford or Romain Rolland became increasingly alarmed at the continued slaughter, but for the reasons we have already mentioned, peace remained elusive until the great German offensives of 1918 had been broken. After what Ludendorff called the Black Day of the German Army, August 8, 1918, a German Crown Council meeting at Spa decided that a victory was no longer possible and decided to negotiate for an armistice. This was not done because of a controversy between the Crown Prince and Ludendorff, in which the former advised an immediate retreat to the Hindenburg Line, 20 miles to the rear, while the latter wished to make a slow withdrawal so that the Entente could not organize an attack on the Hindenburg Line before winter. Two Entente victories at Saint-Quentin, August 31st, and in Flanders, September 2nd, made the dispute moot. The Germans began an involuntary retreat, drenching the ground they evacuated with mustard gas in order to slow up the Entente pursuit, especially the tanks. The German High Command removed the Chancellor Hertling and put in the more democratic Prince Max of Baden, who was supposed to be the King of Finland, with orders to make an immediate armistice or face military disaster, September 29th, October 1st, 1918. On October 5th, a German note to President Wilson asked for an armistice on the basis of the 14 points of January the 8th, 1918, and his subsequent principles of September 27, 1918. These statements of Wilson had captured the imaginations of idealistic persons and subject peoples everywhere. The 14 points promised the end of secret diplomacy, freedom of the seas, freedom of commerce, disarmament, a fair settlement of colonial claims, with the interests of the native peoples receiving equal weight with the titles of imperialist powers. The evacuation of Russia, the evacuation and restoration of Belgium, the evacuation of France, and the restoration to her of Alsace-Lorraine as in 1870. The readjustment of the Italian frontiers on nationality lines, free and autonomous development for the peoples of the Habsburg Empire, the evacuation, restoration, and guarantee of Romania, Montenegro, and Serbia, with the last named securing free access to the sea. International guarantees to keep the straits permanently opened to the ships and commerce of all nations, freedom for the autonomous development of the non-Turkish nationalities of the Ottoman Empire, along with a secure sovereignty for the Turks themselves, an independent Polish state with free access to the sea and with international guarantees, a League of Nations to afford mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike, and no destruction of Germany or even any alteration of her institutions except those necessary to make it clear when her spokesman spoke for the Reichstag majority, and when they speak for the military party and the man whose creed is imperial domination. In a series of notes between Germany and the United States, Wilson made it clear that he would grant an armistice only if Germany would withdraw from all occupied territory, make an end to submarine attacks, accept the 14 points, establish a responsible government, warning that if he had to deal with military masters or monarchical autocrats, he would demand not negotiations but surrender. The German constitution was changed to give all power to the Reichstag. Ludendorff was fired, the German navy at Kiel mutinied, and the Kaiser fled from Berlin October 29. In the meantime, the Entente Supreme War Council refused to accept the 14 points as the basis for peace until Colonel Hauss threatened that the United States would make a separate peace with Germany. They then demanded and received a definition of the meaning of each term, made a reservation on the freedom of the seas, and expanded the meaning of restoration of invaded territory to include compensation to the civilian population for their war losses. On this basis, an armistice commission met German negotiators on November 7th. The German Revolution was spreading, and the Kaiser abdicated on November 9th. The German negotiators received the Entente military terms and asked for an immediate ending of hostilities and of the economic blockade, and a reduction of the Entente demand for machine guns from 30,000 to 25,000 on the grounds that the difference of 5,000 was needed to suppress the German Revolution. The last point was conceded, but the other two refused. The armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, at 5 a.m. to take effect at 11 a.m. It provided that the Germans must evacuate all occupied territory, including Alsace-Lorraine, within 14 days, and the left bank of the Rhine, plus 3 bridgeheads on the right bank, within 31 days, that they surrender huge specified amounts of war equipment, trucks, locomotives, all submarines, the chief naval vessels, all prisoners of war, and captured merchant ships, as well as Baltic fortresses, and all valuables and securities taken in occupied territory, including the Russian and Romanian gold reserves. The Germans were also required to renounce the treaties of Brest-Litovsk and of Bucharest, which they had imposed on Russia and on Romania, and to promise to repair the damage of occupied territories. This last point was of considerable importance, as the Germans had systematically looted or destroyed the areas they evacuated in the last few months of the war. The negotiations with Wilson leading up to the armistice of 1918 subsequent are of great importance, since they formed one of the chief factors in subsequent German resentment at the Treaty of Versailles. In these negotiations, Wilson had clearly promised that the peace treaty with Germany would be negotiated and would be based on the 14 points. As we shall see, the Treaty of Versailles was imposed without negotiation, and the 14 points fared very poorly in its provisions. An additional factor connected with these events lies in the subsequent claim of the German militarists that the German army was never defeated, but was stabbed in the back by the home front through a combination of international Catholics, international Jews, and international socialists. There is no merit whatsoever in these contentions. The German army was clearly beaten in the field. Negotiations for an armistice were commenced by the civilian government at the insistence of the High Command, and the Treaty of Versailles itself was subsequently signed, rather than rejected, at the instance of the same High Command, in order to avoid a military occupation of Germany. By these tactics, the German army was able to escape the military occupation of Germany, which they so dreaded. Although the last enemy forces did not leave German soil until 1931, no portions of Germany were occupied beyond those signified in the armistice itself, the Rhineland and the three bridgeheads on the right bank of the Rhine, except for a brief occupation of the Ruhr district in 1923.